The sun was beating down on the tarmac as a man walked toward the private airport terminal. He wore faded jeans with a small tear near the knee and a simple gray t-shirt that had seen better days. His boots were dusty, and his face showed signs of tiredness from days of hard work. This was Andre, though no one at this high-end airport knew his name yet. Andre had spent the last 3 days in rural communities, helping build homes for families who had lost everything in recent floods. He hadn't bothered to change clothes or clean up much. There simply wasn't time if he wanted to make his next meeting across the country. The private terminal gleamed with polished marble and glass. Well-dressed travelers sipped champagne in plush waiting areas while attendants catered to their every need. Andre stood out immediately as he pushed through the revolving doors, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking nothing like the usual clientele. The front desk attendant, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and an impeccable uniform, glanced up and then quickly looked back down, assuming he had wandered into the wrong place. When Andre approached her desk, she finally looked up with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you find your way, sir?" she asked, her tone suggesting he must be lost. "I'm here for my plane," Andre replied simply, setting his worn backpack on the floor beside him. The attendant's smile faltered slightly. "Your plane?" She emphasized the word as if it were a joke. From the corner of her eye, she noticed one of the security guards taking a few steps closer. "Yes, the Gulfstream G650. It should be fueled and ready for departure to Chicago," Andre said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. The attendant exchanged glances with her colleague at the other end of the desk. A small smile played on both their lips, as if sharing an inside joke. The terminal wasn't unused to people with delusions or those who had clearly made a mistake, but this seemed particularly amusing to them. "Sir, the private jets in this terminal are for authorized passengers only. Perhaps you're looking for the main commercial terminal?" "It's about 2 miles down the road," she explained slowly as if talking to a child. Andre reached into his pocket and pulled out his identification. "I believe everything is in order. The plane is registered to Phoenix Sky Technologies." The attendant took the ID and looked it over, her expression shifting from amusement to confusion. The name matched that of Phoenix Sky's founder, but surely this couldn't be him. Everyone knew that the tech mogul behind one of the most successful aviation technology companies in the world wouldn't look like this. "One moment, please," she said, stepping away to consult with her supervisor, a balding man in his 50s who had been watching the exchange with growing interest. Andre stood, patiently, observing the terminal around him. He noticed how other travelers gave him a wide berth, how staff members whispered behind their hands while glancing in his direction. He was used to this treatment when he returned from his humanitarian projects, but it never ceased to be a revealing window into human nature. The supervisor approached with the attendant trailing behind him. "Good afternoon," he said with a tight smile. "There seems to be some confusion. Could I see your identification again, please?" Andre handed it over once. More. The supervisor studied it closely, turning it over in his hands as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This says you're Andre Phillips, the founder of Phoenix Sky Technologies," the supervisor said, skepticism heavy in his voice. "That's correct," Andre replied simply. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Sir, we deal with high-profile clients every day. We have certain protocols for verifying identity, especially for someone of Mr. Phillips's standing." What he didn't say, but what hung in the air clearly, was that the real Andre Phillips wouldn't look like the man standing before him. The real Andre Phillips would be in an expensive suit, not work-worn clothes. He would have an entourage, not a single backpack. He would, the supervisor's expression suggested, certainly not be a black man who looked like he had just walked off a construction site. "I understand," Andre said. "Would you like to call the number on file? Or perhaps check the flight plan that was filed yesterday? My pilot should already be doing pre-flight checks." The supervisor's face showed he thought this was all an elaborate ruse, but procedure dictated he at least go through the motions of verification. "Wait here, please," he said, returning to his office. Andre watched as more staff gathered, whispering and occasionally laughing behind their hands. He could read their expressions easily, the shared certainty that he was either mentally unbalanced or trying to pull some kind of scam. A security guard positioned himself nearby, trying to look casual but clearly keeping an eye on this potential troublemaker. Minutes passed. Andre didn't take a seat in one of the luxurious waiting areas. He stood where he was, patient and still, like a man accustomed to waiting out other people's assumptions. The supervisor returned, now accompanied by another man wearing a pilot's uniform. The pilot took one look at Andre and his face lit up, with recognition. "Mr. Phillips, I didn't expect you back so soon. How did the build go?" the pilot asked, extending his hand. The supervisor's mouth fell open slightly. The attendant behind the desk froze. The security guard who had been watching Andre suddenly found something interesting to look at on the ceiling. "It went well, Tom. We finished ahead of schedule," Andre replied, shaking the pilot's hand. "The foundation held up perfectly during yesterday's rain, which was a relief." The pilot nodded. "That's excellent news. We're all fueled up and ready whenever you are. Would you like some time to freshen up before we depart?" "That would be good. Thanks," Andre said. The supervisor had turned an interesting shade of red. "Mr. Phillips, we didn't, that is to say," Andre turned to him with a kind smile. "It's no problem at all. You were doing your job." "If we had known it was really you," the supervisor began. "Then what? Would I have been treated differently?" Andre asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. "What if I wasn't Andre Phillips, but just someone who looked like me who had actually chartered a flight? Would the verification process have been the same?" The supervisor had no answer for that. The attendant who had first greeted Andre was now studying her computer screen with intense concentration, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. "The executive lounge is available for you, Mr. Phillips," another staff member said, suddenly appearing at his side. It was remarkable how quickly people could materialize when they realized who he was. "Thank you," Andre said, picking up his backpack. As he followed the staff member toward the lounge, he heard the urgent whispers behind him, saw the frantic tapping on phones as the news spread throughout the terminal that they had nearly turned away one of the wealthiest men in the aviation industry. In the privacy of the executive lounge bathroom, Andre splashed water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection showed a man tired from days of physical labor, but satisfied with what he had accomplished. The homes they had built would shelter families who had lost everything. That meant more to him than the recognition his name carried in places like this. He changed his shirt, washed his hands, and prepared for his board meeting in Chicago. The incident at the desk was already fading from his mind. It wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But for the staff of this terminal, he knew, the story of what happened next would be one they wouldn't soon forget. Freshening up in the executive lounge, Andre emerged looking slightly more presentable but still far from what most would expect of a billionaire tech founder. He had changed into a clean t-shirt from his backpack, but still wore the same worn jeans and dusty work boots. His decision not to travel with designer clothes was deliberate. He preferred to spend those resources on the communities he served instead. As Andre approached the glass doors leading to the tarmac, he could see his jet waiting, sleek and white against the blue sky with the subtle Phoenix Sky Technologies logo on the tail. The sight of it still filled him with a sense of accomplishment, a reminder of how far he'd come from the small apartment where he'd first sketched his revolutionary fuel system designs. Before he could reach the doors, a different staff member stepped into his path, a man with a clipboard and an air of authority. This was the flight coordinator, responsible for final checks before passengers boarded their private aircraft. "Excuse me, sir," the coordinator said, looking Andre up and down with obvious disapproval. "This area is for authorized personnel and confirmed passengers only." Andre stopped, noticing that the security guard who had been watching him earlier was now hovering nearby again. Apparently, the word about his identity hadn't spread to everyone yet. "I'm Andre Phillips. I believe my pilot Tom has already begun pre-flight checks," he explained calmly. The coordinator's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're Andre Phillips?" The doubt in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes," Andre replied simply. The coordinator looked down at his clipboard, flipping through pages with exaggerated care. I don't see any Andre Phillips on today's manifest for that aircraft. I have a Phoenix Sky Technologies executive flight, but... He trailed off, the implication clear. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Other staff members who had heard about the earlier incident at the front desk and were curious to see what would happen next. Among them was the supervisor who had verified Andre's ID, but he stood back, seemingly content to let this new drama unfold without his intervention. Perhaps you could call Tom to confirm, Andre suggested, maintaining his composure. He's expecting me. The coordinator's mouth tightened into a thin line. Sir, I've been coordinating flights at this terminal for 15 years. I know all our regular clients, especially someone like Andre Phillips. Now I'm going to have to ask you to return to the main terminal area while we sort this out. Andre noticed how the man emphasized someone like Andre Phillips, as if to say, someone who couldn't possibly be you. He'd faced this kind of skepticism his entire career. People who couldn't reconcile his appearance with his accomplishments, who needed him to fit their preconceived image of success. I understand your concern, Andre said, but there's a simple way to resolve this. My ID has already been verified by your supervisor. You can also check the flight plan filed yesterday, which includes my name as the primary passenger. A woman in a flight attendant uniform approached, overhearing the conversation. She wore the Phoenix Sky corporate colors and had clearly just come from the jet. Is there a problem here? She asked, looking between Andre and the coordinator. This gentleman is claiming to be Andre Phillips, the coordinator explained, his tone making it clear how unlikely he found this claim. The flight attendant looked at Andre with open skepticism. Mr. Phillips? But I thought... She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. You thought what? Andre asked gently. Well, it's just that Mr. Phillips is... I've never met him personally, but I thought he would be. She struggled to find words that wouldn't be openly offensive. More put together? Andre offered. I've been helping build homes for flood victims the past 3 days. Didn't have time to change into a suit before heading to my board meeting. The flight attendant and coordinator exchanged glances. Their expressions made it clear they weren't buying it. The idea that a billionaire would be doing manual labor in disaster zones rather than sending money from afar didn't fit their worldview. Look, the coordinator said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Whoever you are, this has gone far enough. That aircraft is worth over $60 million. We can't just let anyone walk out and board it based on a story. By now, several other passengers in the terminal had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some were filming discreetly with their phones, sensing that something interesting was happening. The security guard had moved closer, hand resting near his radio. This is ridiculous, a voice called out from the small crowd. It was an older man in an expensive suit, another passenger waiting for his own flight. I've seen Andre Phillips on television, at the World Economic Forum last year. This man looks nothing like him. Andre turned to look at the man, slightly amused. I wasn't at the World Economic Forum last year. You might be thinking of someone else. I most certainly am not, the man insisted, puffing up with indignation. I've followed your company since its IPO. The real Andre Phillips is taller, thinner, and frankly, well, he doesn't look like you. Andre realized what was happening. It wasn't the first time. People had seen someone claim to be him in interviews, usually investors or board members who preferred to be the public face of the company while he focused on the technology and humanitarian work. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, the security guard finally said, stepping forward. We can sort this out away from the other passengers. The crowd had grown larger. Some people were whispering and pointing, others laughing, outright at what they saw as an obvious imposter being caught in the act. The flight attendant had backed away, speaking urgently into her radio, presumably to the pilot. Andre felt the familiar weight of these moments, the public humiliation designed to put him in his place, to remind him that certain spaces weren't meant for people who looked like him unless they conformed to very specific expectations. He could have gotten angry. He could have raised his voice or demanded respect. Instead, he did what experience had taught him was most effective. He reached for his phone. "I'd like to make a call first, if you don't mind," he said to the security guard. "Make it quick," the guard replied, clearly expecting him to call for a ride back to the main terminal. Andre dialed a number from memory and waited. The crowd watched with varying degrees of curiosity and amusement, expecting nothing to come of this last desperate attempt to maintain the charade. "Hello, Richards," Andre said when the call connected. "It's me. I'm having a bit of trouble at the West Side private terminal. It seems there's some confusion about my identity and access to our company jet." There was a pause as he listened to the response. "Yes, the usual issue. Would you mind clearing things up? I'm supposed to be in Chicago in 3 hours for the board meeting." Another pause. "Perfect. Thanks." Andre ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The coordinator was watching him with arms crossed, unmoved by the performance. "Richards? As in Harold Richards, the CFO of Phoenix Sky Technologies?" the coordinator asked, his tone making it clear he thought Andre was bluffing. "I suppose he'll be calling any minute to vouch for you?" "Something like that," Andre replied, his calm unshaken. The minutes that followed were tense. The security guard maintained his position near Andre. The crowd continued to watch, though some began to lose interest as nothing immediate happened. The flight attendant had disappeared back into the jet, presumably to inform the pilot of the situation. Then, something changed. The supervisor who had initially verified Andre's ID came hurrying across the terminal, phone pressed to his ear, face pale. He approached the coordinator and pulled him aside, speaking in urgent whispers. The coordinator's expression shifted from smug certainty to shock, then to something approaching horror. The supervisor hung up, and both men turned to look at Andre with completely different expressions than before. "Mr. Phillips," the supervisor said, his voice now dripping with deference, "please accept our most sincere apologies for this misunderstanding. Your aircraft is ready for immediate departure, and we'll escort you there personally." The coordinator, now ashen-faced, stepped forward. "Mr. Phillips, I had no idea. That is, we get so many people trying to—" He trailed off, realizing he was only making things worse. The crowd that had gathered watched in confusion as the scenario reversed completely. Some of them began to realize what was happening, and phones were raised to capture this unexpected turn of events. "What just happened?" someone in the crowd asked loudly. The supervisor turned to address the onlookers, perhaps hoping to salvage some of the terminal's reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your waiting areas. Mr. Phillips needs to board his aircraft." The older man who had claimed to recognize Andre from television looked particularly dumbfounded. "But that can't be—" "I was certain." Andre approached him with a gentle smile. "You probably saw Gerald Thompson, one of our board members. He often speaks at events on behalf of the company. Easy mistake to make." Without waiting for a response, Andre turned and walked toward the tarmac doors, which were now being held, opened by 2 staff members who couldn't seem to bow low enough. The security guard who had been ready to remove him moments ago now walked ahead, clearing a path with exaggerated movements. As Andre stepped out into the sunlight and approached his waiting jet, he could hear the buzz of conversation behind him. The story would spread quickly, how the staff had nearly removed the owner of both the plane and the company that made it, all because he didn't match their image of what success should look like. The flight attendant who had doubted him stood at the bottom of the jet stairs, her face a mask of professional composure hiding obvious embarrassment. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Phillips," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you," Andre replied kindly. "It's your first flight with us, isn't it? Don't worry about what happened back there. It happens more often than you'd think." As he climbed the stairs, Andre could see Tom, his pilot, watching from the cockpit window with an expression that mixed amusement and sympathy. They'd been through this routine before, at other airports and in other contexts. It was, unfortunately, part of the territory when you defied people's expectations of what power and success should look like. Inside the luxurious cabin, Andre settled into a leather seat and looked out the window at the terminal building. He could see faces pressed against the glass, still watching, still processing what they had witnessed. The lesson they'd just received would be one they'd remember, though whether it would change anything was another question entirely. As the engines began to power up, Andre took a deep breath and focused his thoughts on the meeting ahead. He didn't have time to dwell on what had just happened. There was too much work to be done, too many people counting on him to waste energy on those who judged by appearances. The jet began to taxi, leaving behind a terminal full of people who would be telling this story for years to come. The day, they laughed at the man who owned the plane until he made a single phone call that changed everything. As the jet climbed into the crisp blue sky, Andre leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, feeling the tension of the confrontation slowly drain from his shoulders. The quiet hum of the engines provided a soothing backdrop as he reflected on what had just happened at the terminal. The call he had made was to Richard Henderson, his chief operations officer and oldest friend. They had known each other since college, back when Andre's revolutionary fuel efficiency system was just a series of sketches in a worn notebook. Richard had believed in him when no one else did, and that loyalty had never wavered. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Phillips?" The flight attendant appeared beside his seat, her manner now excessively polite, clearly trying to make up for her earlier behavior. "Just water, thank you," Andre replied with a kind smile. He could see she was still embarrassed, her cheeks flushed as she avoided direct eye contact. When she returned with his water, she hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Phillips, I want to apologize for what happened back there. I should have—" Andre gently raised his hand to stop her. "It's okay, really. You weren't the first and you won't be the last. Still, I feel terrible. I should have recognized you." "Why? We've never met before," Andre pointed out reasonably. "And I don't exactly look like the typical CEO today." She seemed to struggle with this logic, as if unable to reconcile his understanding with her own feeling that she had failed somehow. "Your picture is in our company manual, but you look different in person, especially—" She gestured vaguely at his casual clothes. "Especially when I'm not in a suit with perfect lighting for a corporate photo," Andre finished for her, his tone light. "Life isn't a press release. The real world is messy. I just spent 3 days helping rebuild homes for families who lost everything. Should I have worn a tie for that?" The question wasn't meant to be answered, and she seemed to understand that. With a small nod, she retreated to the galley, leaving Andre alone with his thoughts. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "That was quite a situation you had there," Richard said when Andre answered. His voice held the weariness of someone who had been through this routine too many times before. "Nothing unusual," Andre replied. "Though this time they had quite an audience. Expect some social media buzz." Richard sighed. "Already on it. Our PR team is monitoring mentions." "What exactly happened?" Andre recounted the events at the terminal in detail. The initial skepticism at the front desk, the confrontation before boarding, and the dramatic reversal once Richard's call had gone through to the supervisor. "I had to speak with the terminal manager directly," Richard explained. "The supervisor wasn't taking me seriously at first, had to remind him about our company's contract with their services and how easily it could be moved elsewhere." "You didn't have to threaten them," Andre said, though he knew Richard's protective instincts often overrode his subtlety. "I didn't threaten. I simply clarified the situation." Richard's tone suggested otherwise. "You know, you could make things easier on yourself. Travel with an assistant. Wear the company polo at least. Something to signal who you are." It was an old argument between them. Richard, ever practical, saw Andre's habits as needlessly complicating their business operations. Andre saw them as essential to keeping himself grounded in reality. "And miss these illuminating experiences?" Andre asked with a dry chuckle. "How else would I get such clear demonstrations of how our society actually works?" Richard made a sound. That was half laugh, half groan. Always the social scientist. "One day your illuminating experiences are going to cause real problems. They already do. Just not for me." Andre's voice turned more serious. "For every person who looks like me but doesn't have the ability to make one phone call that changes everything. That's where the real problems are." There was a thoughtful pause on the line. The board meeting is still on schedule, Richard said finally, changing the subject to more comfortable territory. The quarterly reports look good. The new contracts with the European carriers have been finalized. And the community initiative? Andre asked. The business was important, but the Phoenix Foundation, the charitable arm of the company, was where his passion truly lay. Funding approved for 10 more disaster-resistant homes in flood-prone areas, Richard confirmed. Though, some board members are still questioning the return on investment of your hands-on approach. They always do, Andre replied, until they join me for a build and see the faces of the families moving in. Then they get it. The conversation shifted to specific details about the upcoming meeting. As they talked, Andre could feel his mind transitioning from the confrontation at the airport to the work ahead. By the time the call ended, he was fully immersed in thoughts of budgets, projections, and implementation strategies for their newest initiatives. Meanwhile, back at the private terminal, the aftermath of what had happened was still unfolding. The supervisor had called an emergency staff meeting, gathering everyone who had witnessed or been part of the incident. They stood nervously in the break room, many still trying to process the revelation that they had nearly turned away one of their most valuable clients. I just got off the phone with Mr. Henderson again, the supervisor announced, his face grave. For those who don't know, he's the COO of Phoenix Sky Technologies. Their company owns not just the jet that Mr. Phillips was boarding, but 15 others in our hangars. They're our third largest client. A murmur ran through the assembled staff. The coordinator who had confronted Andre looked particularly ill. Are they pulling their business? Someone asked hesitantly. The supervisor took a deep breath. No, Mr. Phillips apparently harbors no ill will over the incident, but this is exactly why our verification procedures exist, to be followed properly, not based on assumptions about how someone looks or dresses. The front desk attendant who had first greeted Andre raised her hand tentatively. But sir, he really didn't look like... Like what? The supervisor cut in sharply. Like a billionaire? And what exactly does a billionaire look like? No one had an answer for that. The truth is, the supervisor continued, we made assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions nearly cost this terminal millions in contracts. Mr. Henderson made it very clear that while Mr. Phillips was understanding, he was watching closely to see how we handle the aftermath. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Their jobs suddenly felt precarious. So what happens now? The coordinator asked. Now we revisit our training. All of us. And we make damn sure nothing like this happens again. As the meeting dispersed, the staff broke into small groups, discussing what had happened in hushed, urgent tones. The older passenger who had claimed to recognize Andre from television was now holding court near the bar, telling anyone who would listen about how he had almost met the real Andre Phillips. I still don't believe it was actually him, he insisted to his growing audience. The real Andre Phillips speaks at economic forums. He's in the business pages. He doesn't look like some construction worker. A younger woman who had been listening intently pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times before holding it up. Actually, I just looked him up. This is him. Andre Phillips, founder and CEO of Phoenix Sky Technologies. On the screen was a photo of Andre, the same man they had all watched board the plane after being nearly removed from the terminal. He was dressed differently in the photo, wearing a simple button-down shirt rather than the t-shirt they had seen him in, but it was unmistakably the same person. That can't be right, the older man sputtered, adjusting his glasses to peer at the screen. It says here, the woman continued, scrolling through the article, that he rarely makes public appearances, preferring to focus on the technical and humanitarian aspects of his business. Most of his public speaking is done by board members or his COO. The revelation spread through the terminal like wildfire. Staff who had witnessed the incident firsthand found themselves retelling it to colleagues who had missed it, each version becoming slightly more dramatic than the last. By the end of the day, the story had evolved into terminal legend. At the same time, on various social media platforms, shaky phone videos of the confrontation were beginning to circulate. Most only captured fragments. Andre being questioned by the coordinator, the security guard approaching, the sudden reversal when the supervisor returned. But even these snippets were enough to spark intense online discussions. Just watched. A black man nearly get kicked out of a private airport for trying to board his own plane. Read one viral post, accompanied by a brief clip of the confrontation. Then he made one phone call and everyone started bowing and scraping. This is what privilege and racism look like in real time. Others defended the terminal staff, arguing that security protocols existed for a reason and that anyone would have been questioned in similar circumstances. These comments quickly drew fierce rebuttals, sparking heated debates across platforms. Phoenix Sky Technologies' official social media accounts remained silent on the matter. But by early evening, their public relations team had crafted a brief statement in response to media inquiries. We are aware of an incident involving our founder and CEO, Andre Phillips, at Westside Private Terminal. Mr. Phillips was returning from one of his regular, community-building projects when the misunderstanding occurred. While we appreciate the terminal's security protocols, we also believe in treating all individuals with respect regardless of appearance. We consider the matter resolved and have no further comment. The carefully worded statement did little to quell the growing online discussion. If anything, it added fuel to the fire, confirming that the man in the videos was indeed the billionaire founder of a major technology company. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above all this digital commotion, Andre was reviewing board meeting documents on his tablet, blissfully unaware of his burgeoning status as the central figure in a viral moment. His mind was already focused on the work ahead, the projects that needed funding, the communities that needed support, the innovations that could push their technology forward. For Andre, the incident at the terminal was just one more reminder of the world he was trying to change, not just through the technology his company created, but through the example he set and the opportunities he created for others. The call he had made was a simple exercise of the power he had earned, but he never forgot that most people who faced such treatment couldn't make a similar call. That reality was what drove him, what kept him working in flood zones and disaster areas instead of attending galas and economic forums. It was why he chose to look the way he did when traveling, not as some social experiment, but as a genuine expression of his priorities. The fact that it occasionally led to situations like today's was, in his view, simply another data point in understanding the world as it was, and imagining what it could be. As the jet continued its journey toward Chicago, Andre set aside his work for a moment and gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below. From this height, the artificial boundaries that divided people seemed insignificant, just invisible lines on a continuous earth. It was a perspective he wished more people could share. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Richard. "You're trending on Twitter. Plane owner, we'll talk when you land." Andre smiled slightly and put the phone away without responding. The digital storm would have to wait. Right now, 35,000 feet above the ground, he had more important things to think about than what the internet thought of him. The real work, the work that actually changed lives, was waiting, and no viral moment would distract him from that. By the time Andre's plane landed in Chicago, the incident at the private terminal had taken on a life of its own. As he stepped off the jet, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Richard was waiting for him on the tarmac, tablet in hand, looking both amused and concerned. "You've become quite the internet sensation in the last 2 hours," Richard said by way of greeting, falling into step beside Andre as they walked toward the waiting car. "That was fast," Andre replied, glancing at the screen Richard held out to him. Various clips of the confrontation played on loop, most captured from angles that suggested passengers in the terminal had been filming discreetly. "People love a good gotcha moment," Richard said, "especially when it involves someone powerful. The narrative practically writes itself. Humble billionaire gets racially profiled, then turns the tables with one phone call." Andre sighed. "Is that really how they're framing it? See for yourself." Richard handed him the tablet as they settled into the back seat of the car. Andre scrolled through social media posts, news articles already being hastily assembled, and comment sections filled with passionate arguments about privilege, racism, and assumptions. Some comments defended the terminal staff, suggesting anyone dressed as he was would have been questioned. Others pointed out that a white man in the same clothes might have been assumed to be eccentric rather than out of place. "Our PR team wants to know if you'd like to make a statement," Richard said as the car pulled away from the airport. "They think this could be a good opportunity to highlight the community work you were doing." Andre handed the tablet back. "No statement. This isn't about me or Phoenix. It's about something much bigger that a corporate statement won't fix." Richard nodded, having expected this response. The board meeting starts in an hour. Several members have already seen the videos and are asking questions. "Let them ask," Andre said, turning his attention to the Chicago skyline outside the window. "Maybe this time they'll actually listen to what I've been saying for years about why our community initiatives matter, the Phoenix Sky Technologies." Headquarters in Chicago occupied the upper floors of a sleek glass tower downtown. As they entered the building, Andre still in his casual clothes from the build site, he noted how differently he was treated here compared to the airport terminal. Security guards nodded respectfully. Employees smiled and greeted him by name, and no one questioned his presence or authority. "The difference is they know who you are here," Richard said quietly, reading his thoughts. "The difference is they've been told who to respect," Andre corrected him. "And that's the problem." The board meeting began promptly at 3 p.m. 12 people sat around the polished conference table, the leadership team that helped guide Phoenix Sky Technologies through its meteoric rise over the past decade. Andre, at the head of the table, was still dressed in his faded jeans and the fresh t-shirt he had changed into on the plane. The contrast between his appearance and the formal business attire of everyone else in the room was striking. "Before we begin the regular agenda," said Linda Winters, the head of their legal department, "I think we should address the situation at the airport. The videos are spreading quickly, and we need a unified response strategy." Several board members nodded in agreement, some looking at their phones where notifications were still coming in about the viral incident. "There's nothing to address," Andre said calmly. "It was a misunderstanding that was resolved. Let's move on to business matters." "With all due respect," said Gregory Palmer, one of the newer board members, "this is a business matter. Your personal brand is intertwined with the company's. These videos show you being treated, well, frankly, being treated terribly until your identity was confirmed. It reflects on all of us." Andre leaned forward slightly. "And why do you think I was treated that way, Gregory?" The question hung in the air. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. "Because you didn't look the part," Gregory finally offered, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't match their expectation of what a CEO should look like." "And what exactly should a CEO look like?" Andre pressed. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "That's not what I meant, it's just the clothes, the lack of entourage. Most people in your position would have assistants, security, a certain presentation. Most people in my position didn't grow up where I did," Andre replied, his voice level but firm. "Most people in my position haven't seen what happens to communities when the only time they see wealth is when it's driving through on the way to somewhere else." The room fell silent. This was territory they rarely discussed in board meetings, though Andre's background was no secret. Born in a struggling neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, he had fought his way through an underfunded education system, worked multiple jobs to put himself through engineering school, and developed his revolutionary fuel efficiency system while living in a one-room apartment with unreliable heating. "What happened today wasn't an isolated incident," Andre continued after a moment. "It's exactly why our community initiatives aren't just charity. They're essential to our mission. When we build disaster-resistant homes in underserved areas, when we fund engineering programs in schools others have written off, we're not just being nice. We're changing what success looks like. We're showing that it doesn't have to wear a suit or arrive in a motorcade." Richard, sitting to Andre's right, nodded approvingly. He had been there from the beginning, had seen the struggles firsthand, and understood better than most what drove Andre's unusual approach to business and philanthropy. "The videos actually tell a powerful story," said Amara Johnson, their chief marketing officer. "They show exactly why your hands-on approach matters. People are responding to that authenticity." Our community initiatives suddenly make more sense. To the public because they can see that you're not just writing checks, you're doing the work. Andre looked around the table, taking in the thoughtful expressions of his leadership team. When I started this company, I promised myself two things. First, that our technology would make air travel more accessible by reducing its environmental impact and cost. Second, that we would never forget who we're really building for, not just those who can already afford to fly private, but those who might never set foot on a plane without our innovations. He paused, looking at each board member in turn. What happened today was uncomfortable. It was humiliating, but it was also a reminder of why we do what we do. Those staff members didn't see me. They saw their own assumptions. Our job isn't to blame them. Our job is to change the picture in people's heads of what success can look like. The board meeting proceeded to its regular agenda after that, but something had shifted in the room. The quarterly reports and financial projections seemed connected to a larger purpose now, tied directly to the viral moment that had unexpectedly humanized their company in the public eye. Meanwhile, back at the private terminal, things were also changing. The terminal manager had called in a corporate trainer specializing in unconscious bias for an emergency session with all staff. Employees sat in uncomfortable silence as they watched their own behavior dissected through video clips that had now been viewed millions of times online. I didn't even realize I was doing it, the front desk attendant admitted during the discussion period. I just automatically assumed he couldn't be who he said he was because of how he looked. We all did, the coordinator added. And the thing is, we pride ourselves on customer service. We think we treat everyone well, but clearly we don't. We treat people well when they match our expectations of who deserves good treatment. The trainer nodded. That's the insidious nature of unconscious bias. It operates below our awareness, shaping our behaviors and decisions without our conscious consent. The first step toward change is recognizing it's happening. As the training session continued, the terminal staff began to understand the full context of what had transpired. One of the administrative assistants had done some research and shared what she had learned about Andre Phillips and his unusual approach to business and philanthropy. Apparently, he regularly works alongside construction crews building disaster-resistant homes, she explained to her colleagues. That's why he looked the way he did. He had literally been helping build houses for 3 days straight before coming to catch his flight. This revelation sparked a ripple of murmurs through the room. The image of a billionaire CEO doing manual labor alongside construction workers challenged their mental models in profound ways. And get this, she continued, reading from her phone. He's known for showing up unannounced at various Phoenix facilities around the country, often dressed casually, to talk directly with employees at all levels. Some new employees have mistaken him for maintenance staff before. The coordinator who had confronted Andre covered his face with his hands. Great, so this isn't even the first time. He probably has a collection of stories about being mistreated by his own industry. Actually, the administrative assistant said, still reading, he rarely talks about these incidents publicly. His focus seems to be entirely on the company's technological innovations and community initiatives. This information only made the staff feel worse. The man they had nearly removed from the terminal wasn't just powerful. He was genuinely working to make a difference in ways that went beyond typical corporate social responsibility programs. Back in Chicago, as the board meeting concluded, Andre found himself alone with Richard in the conference room. The other members had filed out, leaving them to review the day's decisions. You know what's ironic? Andre said, gathering his notes. If I had been wearing a suit today, none of this would have happened. No viral videos, no trending hashtags, no emergency bias training at the terminal. Richard chuckled. You could always try dressing the part just as an experiment. I did, remember? For the first 2 years after we went public. Expensive suits, luxury watches, the whole costume. Andre shook his head at the memory. And you know what happened? I became invisible in a different way. People saw the CEO they expected to see, not the person I actually am or the work that actually matters. Richard nodded, understanding. He had watched his friend navigate these complicated waters for years, trying to balance the requirements of corporate leadership with his deep commitment to remaining connected to the communities that shaped him. Besides, Andre continued, those 3 days building homes weren't a photo op or a publicity stunt. The work needed to be done, and I was there to do it. The clothes match the work. And now millions of people have seen exactly that authenticity, Richard pointed out. Maybe some good will come from today's unpleasantness after all. As they left the conference room, Andre's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the terminal manager, a formal apology for the incident, along with an invitation for Andre to speak at their company-wide diversity and inclusion seminar the following month. Andre showed the email to Richard, who raised an eyebrow. Are you going to do it? I might, Andre replied thoughtfully. Not to shame them, but because real change happens face-to-face, not through viral videos or corporate statements. They walked through the open office area where Phoenix employees were finishing their workday. Andre stopped to chat with several of them, asking about their projects and their families with genuine interest. No one here questioned his authority or his right to be in the building, despite his casual appearance. They had moved beyond seeing just his clothes or his skin color to knowing the person he actually was. That's the real goal, Andre said quietly to Richard as they continued toward the elevator. Not just for me to be recognized despite how I look, but for everyone to be seen for who they really are, not who others assume them to be. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Richard glanced at his phone one more time. The videos have over 10 million views now. You're officially a social media phenomenon. Andre smiled slightly. Good. Maybe that means 10 million people are thinking a little differently tonight about what success looks like. Maybe a few of them will question their own assumptions tomorrow. That's worth more than any corporate statement we could ever write. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, where a group of visitors on a corporate tour looked up in surprise as Andre and Richard stepped out. Their tour guide's eyes widened in recognition. And speaking of perfect timing, the guide said, excitedly to her group, here's our founder and CEO right now. Mr. Phillips, would you mind saying a few words to our visitors? Andre smiled warmly at the group, noticing their surprised expressions as they took in his casual appearance. I'd be happy to, he said, stepping forward to shake hands with each visitor. Welcome to Phoenix Sky Technologies. Let me tell you about what we're building here, and why it matters. As he began to speak, sharing the vision that had driven him from that small South Side apartment to the heights of business success, he could see the initial surprise in their eyes giving way to genuine interest and respect. It wasn't his title that commanded their attention, but his passion, his knowledge, and his authenticity. And that, Andre thought as he engaged with the visitors, was exactly the point. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been judged based on appearance, rather than ability. The real revelation wasn't that a man who looked like him could own a plane. It was that such ownership should never have been surprising in the first place. 1 week after the incident at the private terminal, Andre sat in his office in Chicago, reviewing a proposal for the company's newest community initiative. The wall of windows behind his desk offered a sweeping view of the city, including the South Side neighborhood where he had grown up. He never chose this office by accident. The view was a daily reminder of his journey and the people he was working to uplift. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Richard, tablet in hand as usual. The terminal manager is on line 3, Richard said. He wants to speak with you personally. Andre nodded and picked up the phone. This is Andre Phillips. Mr. Phillips, this is William Taylor, manager of Westside Private Terminal. Thank you for taking my call. The man's voice held a note of nervous formality. What can I do for you, Mr. Taylor? Andre asked, keeping his tone neutral. First, I want to extend my deepest apologies for what happened last week. It was completely unacceptable, and we've taken immediate steps to address the underlying issues. I appreciate that, Andre replied, but I assume you're not calling just to apologize again. There was a pause on the line. No, sir. I'm calling because your incident has prompted a company-wide reevaluation of our protocols and training. Our corporate office has approved a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative, and they've asked me to lead it. Andre raised his eyebrows surprised by this development. That's good to hear. The thing is, Taylor continued, his voice becoming less formal and more genuine, I don't want this to be just another corporate checkbox exercise. I've been watching the conversations your incident sparked online, reading the comments, really, listening to the perspectives being shared, and I've realized how much I don't know, how much all of us don't know, about the experiences of people who don't look like the typical private aviation client. Andre leaned back in his chair, his interest genuinely piqued. And what would you like from me, Mr. Taylor? Guidance, perspective, maybe even participation if you're willing. We're organizing a series of training sessions for all our terminal staff nationwide, focusing on unconscious bias and inclusive customer service. Having you involved, even in a small way, would make a powerful impact. Instead of answering immediately, Andre asked a question. What happened to the staff members who were directly involved that day? The front desk attendant, the coordinator, the security guard? Taylor seemed surprised by the question. They haven't been terminated, if that's what you're asking. They've been temporarily reassigned to non-customer-facing roles while they complete additional training. Against my better judgment, I'm going to make a suggestion, Andre said after a thoughtful pause. Don't hide them away. Don't make them the scapegoats for a systemic problem. If you're serious about creating real change, those individuals should be at the center of your initiative, not pushed to the margins. I'm not sure I understand, Taylor replied, confusion evident in his voice. The people who treated me poorly that day. You're not uniquely biased or prejudiced, Andre explained patiently. They were simply acting on the same assumptions that most people in your industry, in our society, make every day. The difference is, they got caught on camera doing it. Making an example of them won't solve the real problem. Then what would you suggest? Taylor asked. Invite them to tell their side of the story as part of your training. Not to defend their actions, but to explain honestly what assumptions they were making and why. That kind of vulnerable reflection is worth more than 100 generic training videos. There was a long silence on the line as Taylor considered this unexpected advice. That's not the approach our HR department recommended, he finally said. I'm sure it isn't, Andre replied with a slight smile. But ask yourself this. Do you want to protect your company from future embarrassment, or do you want to create genuine change? Because those are two different goals requiring two different approaches. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Andre offering specific suggestions for making the terminal's new initiative more than just a public relations exercise. By the end of the call, Taylor seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the alternative approach. One more thing, Andre said before ending the call. I'd like to personally meet with the staff members who were involved that day. Not to lecture them or make them uncomfortable, but to have an honest conversation. I can arrange that, Taylor said, his tone suggesting he was still trying to process everything Andre had suggested. When would you like this meeting to take place? I'll be flying through your terminal again next Thursday. Have them meet me in the executive lounge after I land. After hanging up, Andre turned to Richard, who had been listening to the entire conversation. You never cease to amaze me, Richard said, shaking his head with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. Anyone else in your position would be demanding firings or lawsuits. What good would that do? Andre asked. Fire a few people? The company issues a public apology, everyone feels like the problem has been solved, and nothing actually changes. Still, meeting with them personally? After how they treated you? Andre looked out the window at the city, below. Those people weren't seeing me that day, Richard. They were seeing a lifetime of images and messages about who belongs in which spaces. Punishing them won't change those images. Only human connection can do that. The following Thursday, Andre's plane landed at Westside Private Terminal. This time he was dressed similarly to how he had been during the incident. Jeans, a simple t-shirt, and work boots. It wasn't a costume or a test. He had spent the morning at a local school where Phoenix was funding a new engineering lab, helping to install equipment. As he descended the steps from his aircraft, he noticed the difference immediately. The same flight coordinator who had confronted him before was waiting on the tarmac, along with the terminal manager, Taylor. Both looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Phillips, welcome back to Westside," Taylor said, extending his hand. "Everything is prepared for your meeting in the executive lounge." Andre shook his hand. "Thank you for arranging this." As they walked through the terminal, Andre noticed the subtle but significant differences in how staff members interacted with him. There was a heightened awareness, an almost exaggerated politeness that suggested everyone had been briefed about his return. It wasn't exactly natural, but it was a start. In the executive lounge, 4 people waited: the front desk attendant, the flight coordinator, the security guard, and the flight attendant who had been on his plane that day. They stood as he entered, their body language revealing various degrees of discomfort and apprehension. "Please sit down," Andre said, taking a seat that put him at the same level as everyone else, deliberately avoiding the head of the table. "I appreciate you all agreeing to this meeting." They exchanged uncertain glances before slowly taking their seats. The tension in the room was palpable. "Before we begin," Andre said, "I want to make one thing clear. This isn't about blame or punishment. I didn't ask for this meeting to make you feel worse than you already do. I'm here because I believe what happened last week is an opportunity for something valuable." The front desk attendant, a young woman named Beth according to her name tag, spoke first. "Mr. Phillips, I want to apologize directly for how I treated you when you first arrived. There's no excuse for it." Andre nodded, acknowledging her apology. "Can I ask you something, Beth? When I approached your desk and said I was there for my plane, what was your first thought?" Beth hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. I thought you were confused or maybe at the wrong terminal." "And why did you think that?" Andre pressed gently. "Because..." She paused, struggling to articulate something she had never had to explain before. "Because you didn't look like someone who would own a private jet." "And what does someone who owns a private jet look like?" Andre asked, keeping his tone curious rather than accusatory. Beth glanced at her colleagues as if hoping someone else would jump in. When no one did, she took a deep breath. "I guess I always pictured someone in expensive clothes, maybe with an assistant or security. Someone who looks rich." Andre nodded. "That's a natural assumption based on what we see in media, in movies, in the world around us. The problem isn't that you made that assumption. The problem is that our systems are set up to treat people differently based on those assumptions." He turned to the flight coordinator, Michael, who had been the most confrontational during the incident. "You were doing your job that day, protecting a valuable aircraft from what you perceived as a potential security risk. I understand that, but I'd like to ask you to consider something. If I had been dressed in a custom suit with an entourage, would you have questioned my identity with the same intensity?" Michael looked down at the table. "No, sir, I probably wouldn't have." "And that's the heart of what we're talking about today," Andre said. "It's not about individual blame. It's about recognizing the patterns that influence all our judgments and decisions, often without our conscious awareness." For the next hour, the conversation flowed more freely as the staff members gradually relaxed and began to share their honest reflections about what had happened and why. The security guard admitted that he had been influenced by previous incidents of trespassing attempts, creating a heightened suspicion of anyone who didn't fit the typical client profile. The flight attendant explained how her training had emphasized recognizing high-value customers, but had never addressed the diversity of what those customers might look like. Andre listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions that helped each person explore their own thinking more deeply. There were uncomfortable moments, painful recognitions, and occasionally defensive responses, but there was also genuine engagement with difficult truths. "I've been working in private aviation for 15 years, Michael said at one point, "and I've never had a client who looked like you and dressed like you do. That's not an excuse for how I acted. It's a statement about the reality of this industry." "And why do you think that is?" Andre asked. "Obvious reasons, historical. Wealth disparities, racism, lack of opportunity," Michael replied, showing more awareness than Andre had expected. "But also because the industry itself creates barriers. The way we operate, the assumptions we make, the image we project, it all sends a message about who belongs and who doesn't. Andre nodded, impressed by the insight. That's exactly right. And that's why incidents like what happened last week aren't just about individual behavior. They're about systems and cultures that need to change. As the meeting drew to a close, Andre made a proposal that surprised everyone in the room. I'd like to invite each of you to participate in one of our community building projects, not as punishment, but as an opportunity to step outside your usual environment and see a different side of the work my company does. The staff members exchanged uncertain glances. You want us to build houses? Beth asked, clearly confused by the suggestion. For a day or two, yes, Andre confirmed. Working alongside the people who will live in those houses, and alongside me and other Phoenix employees who volunteer regularly. It's an experience that changes perspectives in ways that conversation alone cannot. To his surprise, all four agreed to the invitation, albeit with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The terminal manager, who had been quietly observing the entire meeting, looked pleased with the outcome. One last thing before I go, Andre said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. The videos of our last encounter have been viewed millions of times now. People who watch them see a clear villain and victim narrative, but the reality is more complicated than that. We all operate within systems that shape our perceptions and behaviors. The real victory isn't in pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's in recognizing those systems and working to change them. As Andre left the terminal that day, walking across the tarmac toward a waiting car, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple misunderstanding 1 week earlier. The incident had been humiliating in the moment, but it had created ripples that were now reaching far beyond that single interaction. Phoenix Sky Technologies had received hundreds of messages from people sharing similar experiences of being judged by their appearance, rather than their abilities or achievements. The company's community initiatives were receiving unprecedented attention and support, and perhaps most significantly, conversations about unconscious bias and systemic inequality were happening in places where they had previously been ignored or dismissed. 2 months later, Andre stood on a construction site in a flood-damaged neighborhood in Louisiana. Alongside him, wearing hard hats and work gloves, were Beth, Michael, and the other staff members from the terminal. They had taken him up on his invitation, flying down for a 3-day build with the Phoenix Foundation's disaster recovery program. Work was hard, laying foundations, framing walls, installing weather-resistant materials in the hot Louisiana sun. But as the days progressed, something remarkable happened. The artificial barriers of status and position fell away, replaced by the simple camaraderie of people working together toward a common goal. On the final day, as they gathered to watch a family receive the keys to their newly rebuilt home, Beth approached Andre. "I understand now," she said quietly. "Why you dress the way you do when you travel. Why you do this work yourself instead of just writing checks." Andre nodded, waiting for her to continue. "It's not just about helping people," Beth said, gesturing toward the family who were now exploring their new home with tears of joy. "It's about being connected to what matters, about not letting success separate you from reality." "That's part of it," Andre agreed. "But it's also about challenging expectations, showing that success doesn't have to look the way we've been told it should look, that you don't have to change who you are or where you come from to belong in any space." Michael joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've been thinking about our terminal procedures," he said, "about how many of our protocols are based on assumptions about what our clients look like, act like, dress like. We're missing opportunities to serve people well because we're too busy judging whether they belong." Andre smiled. "That sounds like the beginning of meaningful change." Later that evening, as the Phoenix Company jet prepared for departure back to Chicago, Andre stood on the tarmac saying goodbye to the terminal staff members who would be flying commercial the next day. The relationships that had formed over 3 days of shared work were genuine in a way that no formal training program could have created. "What happens now?" Beth asked as they said their goodbyes. "The videos are still out there. People are still talking about what happened. Now we do the real work," Andre replied. "Not just you or me, but all of us. Changing systems is harder than changing individual minds. but it's the only way to create lasting difference. As Andre boarded his plane, he reflected on how a moment of humiliation had transformed into something powerful and positive. The lesson wasn't just for the terminal staff or even for the millions who had watched the viral videos. It was for everyone who had ever been judged based on appearance rather than ability, for everyone who had ever felt they didn't belong in spaces where they had every right to be. The real power, Andre realized as the jet lifted into the evening, Sky wasn't in making a call that changed how he personally was treated. The real power was in using that experience to help others see the world differently, to recognize the hidden barriers that shaped their perceptions and actions, and to begin the hard work of dismantling those barriers, one conversation, one project, one changed mind at a time. 6 months after the incident, Westside Terminal implemented a completely revamped training program for all staff, featuring honest testimonials from Beth, Michael, and the others about their experiences and what they had learned. The program became a model for the industry, adopted by private airports across the country. Phoenix Sky Technologies expanded its community initiatives, creating pathways for young people from underserved communities to enter careers in aviation and engineering. The company's annual report that year featured photos not of corporate offices or executive teams, but of employees working alongside community members on building projects, educational programs, and disaster recovery efforts. And Andre continued to travel as he always had, dressed for the work he was doing rather than the expectations of others, focused on substance over appearance, using his position not just to open doors for himself, but to keep them open for those who would come after him. The story of the black man who boarded a plane looking destitute, claimed he owned it, was laughed at until he made a call. That story could have ended with the viral moment of vindication. But the real story, the one that created lasting change, was what happened after the cameras stopped rolling and the hard work of transformation began.